On to Caitlin.
Hi, all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm not going to take up too much time. I just have a couple of announcements related to the 2023 annual meeting. So first is that the call for proposals is now open. There's a link in the agenda. The call will close on February 6th, and at this point, there's no plan to extend that any further. So if you are thinking about putting in a proposal, now is the time. Also time sensitive is that we have a large number of hotel rooms in Naples at reduced rates for conference attendees. However, those rates will expire on January 31st. We have been told by our local partners that the cost and the availability of hotel rooms will go up and decrease respectively as we get closer to spring. So if you are thinking about coming, we would recommend that you reserve a hotel room now, even if you have to cancel it or amend it later. Okay, then I'll turn it back to Glenn.
That's great, thank you. So today's meeting, we're hoping to talk about ARKs and IIIF. And before we start, I just want to point to this excellent article that Julien and John have produced, which they shared on the Slack channel, which gives kind of a background to ARKs and also their applicability to IIIF. And that's really kind of framed the call that we're hoping to have today. The document that they produced mentions that IIIF does kind of require identifiers and persistent identifiers. But it doesn't mandate a single standard, but there are lots of advantages to using ARKs. And so we're going to explore the background to ARK Alliance and also talk about the intersection of ARKs and IIIF, and then look at a practical use case with Durham. And then we're hoping to have a Q&A discussion at the end. So if you do have any questions on the presentations, feel free to ask them as they're presenting, and we'll collect them at the end. And then we'll do a short Q&A between different sessions, and then a larger Q&A at the end. So if I can start off with passing over to John, who's going to take us through ARK's overview.
Thank you, Glenn. I hope you can hear me. Let me get my screen sharing going. So happy Wednesday and welcome to this brief overview of ARK identifiers. I'll speak and then Julien will speak, and then I believe Richard will be next. So my name is John Kunze, and I'm a computer scientist working on standards and software systems for libraries, archives, and museums. The world of ARKs is growing rapidly. In particular, the last 2 years has seen the number of ARK organizations increase from about 600 to over 1,000. And the former ARKs in the Open Initiative became the ARK Alliance. As a reminder, ARK stands for Archival Resource Key, a special kind of URL that can serve as a persistent identifier. Collectively, libraries, archives, and data centers and publishers have created over 3.2 billion ARKs for content such as scanned books, medieval manuscripts, botanical specimens, fine art, etc. In that time, we've also seen detailed ARK applications in natural history, genealogy, and publishing, and more recently in physical samples, in biomedical artificial intelligence, and in vocabulary terms. So why do we care about ARK identifiers? Well, the average lifetime of a URL was once said to be 100 days. At the end of its life, URL link breaks, usually giving you the dreaded 404 not found error that most of us have seen. Irritating at best, it's a minor disaster for memory organizations. So ARKs are similar to DOIs or digital object identifiers. They're both persistent identifiers for accessing content and metadata, and ARKs are found in many of the places where you'll find DOIs. In contrast, ARKs come with no fees, no limits on how many you can create, and no metadata requirements. From the beginning, ARKs were designed to be decentralized and to identify any kind of thing digital, physical, or abstract. Here's what an ARK looks like. At first glance, it's a URL that carries this internal label. To the right, the 5-digit name assigning authority number identifies the organization that created the ARK. Further to the right, that part after that names the thing that the ARK is assigned to. To the left, the host name makes the ARK actionable, or something you can click on. It's also known as the resolver. ARKs are unusual among persistent identifiers in allowing organizations to run their own resolvers. The part starting with ARK : is the core globally unique identity. It doesn't depend on the host being available or on the future existence of the World Wide Web. So why is the ARK resolver called N2T? Why doesn't the ARK resolver contain the letters ARK? Well, the ARK design wanted to break out of the silos and walled gardens surrounding resolvers for other identifiers. So what got built was a name to thing resolver, a generic service. It's known as N2T for short, which helps for short citations, and it resolves hundreds of different identifier schemes. So ARK organizations include a wide variety of memory organizations, nonprofits, for-profits, government agencies. A few of them are listed on this slide. We've seen accelerating adoption recently in South America, Africa, and India. To see an ARK in action, here's one example from the Louvre Museum in the lower right-hand corner. There are, of course, many other examples. I won't go through all of these, but you can sort of in descending order numbers, you can see that genealogical records are responsible for the vast majority of ARKs that we know about. But I remind you that this is a conservative estimate of the number of ARKs because we just have anecdotal evidence right now. We don't have a centralized registry for these. So I would be interested to know, for example, from Richard Higgins, how many ARKs there are at Durham, because we don't have any data on that. So I'm fascinated to learn more about that. So here is a visualization from Dave Viglaise, which allows us to visit the South Pacific island of Moorea in French Polynesia. Each colored point represents a physical sample, and the towers indicate that many samples were collected at the same geographical location. In the iSamples project, each sample point has an ARK identifier, which is displayed when mousing over the sample points. Clicking on a sample point brings up summary metadata for the sample, which allows you to link back to the original collection. Following that link to the Smithsonian Institution, you can find more details about the specimen with cross-references to analyses, publications, and other material. This interlinking is facilitated by millions of ARK identifiers, and the number of participating collections is expected to expand significantly as the project continues. This is all part of the National Science Foundation iSamples project, which assigns identifiers to biological specimens, rocks, and archaeological artifacts. So one feature of the N2T resolver is called suffix pass-through. It's a feature that a web server might support in order to greatly increase the number of identifiers that it can forward. Suffix pass-through dramatically reduces the burden of maintaining identifiers by permitting one identifier to stand in for millions. The way it works, given a URL for a stored identifier, if it arrived with an appended suffix, N2T in this case, or the resolver or web server, will reappend it or pass it through to the identifier's stored forwarding destination or forwarding application, whatever service is designed to handle it. This is critical, I think, for IIIF, since the many addressable subparts and formats in the interface don't all have to be separately registered, maintained, and possibly paid for. Julien, I will say more about this when he speaks. So I believe that's it for my part. I will stop sharing and turn it over to the next act.
Thank you, John. I'm going to share my screen. Just a moment. I think on my side looks good. Hopefully you can see it. Otherwise, let me know. So yeah, I'm going to talk more about the possibilities of combining or using jointly archival resource keys and IIIF resources, or IIIF in general, not only to point to IIIF resources. And well, some background information. Glenn already mentioned that last November, we published on the ARK Alliance website a blog post, which is titled "The Images and the Promise of ARKs with IIIF." But also some of the content I'm going to present now was already actually done or discussed during a webinar, and that was in October 2021 in the context of the Towards National Collection project in the UK. So ARKs and IIIF, so overall, I'd say, well, they're both open communities that maintains either or standards and infrastructure. And with ARK, previously was called the ARKs in the Open, and which has evolved to the ARK Alliance. And in IIIF, as I guess all or many of you know, well, there is also this community, and the consortium that actually helps the community to be sustained. They're both prevalent in the cultural heritage field, even if that's not, I mean, even if IIIF and ARKs can be used in other different, in many different fields. And something that is quite interesting, it's to me personally, that it's highly flexible in terms of associated metadata. If you have a DOI, you will most likely need, let's say, you have DataCite DOIs, and you will use the DataCite metadata standards to with your DOI. Something that ARKs do not have, but with ARKs actually you can create or mint an identifier with metadata or without any metadata, with the metadata, descriptive metadata of your choice. And I think that's also high talk in IIIF. Which is pretty agnostic in terms of what kind of descriptive metadata should be associated with IIIF manifest, for example. And there is no direct fees, of course. It's expensive to sustain that over the long term, but either ARK identifiers are using or leveraging IIIF. You don't need to pay upfront to start actually creating something with it. Or you have the choice, let's say. I'm just going to focus more on the IIIF image API, because that's where, with the different parameters that you have here with the scheme, server, prefix, and here what it's interesting to the ARK Alliance, or for any, I guess, people interested in implementing cool URIs or persistent identifiers is this part. And here's are two examples of how the IIIF image API can be actually accessed or requested either through the info.json, so parameters or functionalities, features that the image servers can have, and then the request that you want to be displayed on your browser. And in terms of how it is expressed, identifies maybe an ARK, URI, URN, sorry, file name or other identifiers. That's what the image API actually tells us to do. And another part, which could be discussed later during this call meeting, is that all special characters must be URI encoded to avoid unpredictable kind behaviors. And that's also something that is quite important for ARK identifiers, because we do have also within the ARK specification some characters that are not allowed, which are actually allowed in URIs, but not in ARKs. And the presentation API, so the other core IIIF APIs, there is this snippet that I took from the specification that while any HTTPS URI is technically acceptable for any of the resources in the API, there are several best practices for designing the URIs for the resources. And we hope that one of the best practice within in the ARK Alliance is to use ARK, leverage ARK, because once published, they should be as persistent and unchanging as possible, and has being also now more on the research side as in the library side previously, it's more true than ever that I don't like when IIIF resources actually change or are not redirect to the right location. And here are a couple of examples. John already explained the ARK anatomy. So that's the first one. And with the new ARK specification, now between the ARK and the NAND, there is not a need anymore to have the slash between them, but still use that. But I removed that to get the, let's say, the newest specifications here. So we have the image API request, image API information, and I think where it's quite interesting also with the suffix path-through feature that Entity does or other local servers could have is these qualifiers, and these ARK qualifiers could be translated here in the image API syntax as the different parameters that the image API specifies. Same goes with the info.json. Presentation API resource, it's not not that much more information than the image API. And here, just an example of how they could be used conjointly. Of course, it can be done differently. What also has to be said is that you have many different ways of implementing ARKs. If you have a look at the BNF, the French National Library, you will always see the ARK label in the resources when they apply ARKs, but you don't have to. ARKs can, like DOI does, actually redirects to URL that actually do not have any information about what kind of URL it is. So they will remove that information. Let's say that we want to keep it like some institutions do. So the ARK suffixes, and we saw that earlier, I think, with the example, which are used to refer to subject checks in a hierarchy and to variant formats, are natural fit for IIIF, and most likely also for the image API rather than the presentation API. But I guess both are very important to be accessed persistently. And the second thing is this suffix path-through feature that is quite important. That could be actually quite important when you don't have to register a lot of different, let's say, IDs, or you don't have to mint a lot of those. You mint just once, and if you have a very clear strategy, then it can be a lot of different objects are behind that main, that top level resolvable ARK. And we already saw actually that example from John earlier. And in practice, well, many organizations use ARK and IIIF specifications. If you have a look at the list on the IIIF website or the ARK Alliance website, you will, and it's not a surprise, I mean, memory institutions, BNF, British Library, they both use ARKs and IIIF, sometimes jointly, sometimes it's just that it's together, but it's not, let's say, talking to each other or not thought jointly, but it's, let's say they have person identifiers within their ARK resources, but it could be also applicable in not only in IIIF image or presentation APIs, but more in, let's say you want to have a different view of an image. Here you can also, ARK can be quite also interesting. There is another part of the ARK anatomy where you can specify shoulders, and within these different shoulders, it's like a variable. And well, you go, let's say, on Mirador, maybe on the universal viewer, and so on. So it's not only, it doesn't have to be tied to the IIIF core specifications. And some of the questions that John and I thought, and that could be discussed later, is, well, do we need best practices for using persistent identifiers such as ARKs with IIIF? What about also best practices around reserved URI characters, especially in IIIF image API? And what about annotations? Because maybe some of the annotations we want also to preserve them, and persistent identifiers could be an interesting way. And here, just image credits if you're interested to have a look later as those images. And that's it from my side. And I guess we go, so Richard, could you share your screen? And then afterwards, we will have a discussion. I think we'll have enough time. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
Thank
great.
you.
And just sorry, just if you've got any questions, do feel free to drop them into the chat as we're going along.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Okay, Richard, sorry.
Thank you. I shall try that. Yes, you should now be seeing something, with the usual problem that the bar goes over the. I don't know. Yes, that should work. Yes, so I was asked to talk about a practical application of ARK, and we have actually found ARKs enormously useful, and so far they have done everything that I have hoped they would do, which was enable us to design a small IIIF system that has been able to grow into a bigger and bigger IIIF system without our having to think too much about it. Probably about 15 years ago, we implemented the Fedora 3 digital repository, which had a thing called PIDs in it, which we were told meant permanent identifiers. So I felt this was a very good thing and built a lot of work around them. But when Fedora 4 was issued, it turned out that the Fedora 4 system of PIDs was completely incompatible with the Fedora 3 system of PIDs, which immediately made me think maybe we shouldn't be tying anything that we do in this area to a particular product, because we are at the whim of the people who design the product as to whether or not they carry on using the same system. Last year, we migrated from the Millennium Library Management System to the Alma Library Management System, to completely different ways of identifying individual records that we still have to sort out, which have made all sorts of interesting problems. And again, the issue is tying yourselves to one system. And so one of the great benefits of ARKs is, as we've heard, you have complete control over them once you have got your basic implementation. So what we're seeing on the screen here is our internal interface that we use for editing and expanding a basic IIIF ingestion of content, image content in our case. And this is a collection, Cremation Society of Great Britain, a society formed in the 19th century to advocate the introduction and use of cremation in the country as it had been for illegal. And you can see already there is an ARK here. So the collection has an ARK. It's also got a sub-collection, which in turn has an ARK as well. Now, if you were to open the ARK, just get to it, we have got the manifest for this subcollection. But if you were to open the ARK with .html on the end of it, because you can control how it interprets URLs, we have made this manifest open in a viewer. So by adding .html onto the end of the ARK for the manifest, the standard behavior with a manifest, as we know in IIIF, is you want to open it in a viewer. So immediately for every one of our manifests, you can add .html onto the end of it and it will open in a viewer. And here we have some wonderful books of cuttings, all of which are very much falling apart, and so a very good advert for digitizing material to make it accessible. And they are there. And again, if we were to go down into one of the things itself, we would again have an ARK for the manifest and an ARK that would open it. These work through to our entity server that we have, and it does all of that. It brings up the 3 letters entity on the screen. But if we put an ARK into it, so here we have got an ARK. Remember, we've seen the name to things server and the ARK, and that has expanded up to open a manifest, and we have there got the manifest, which we all know and love, and within it we have got canvases, etc., which are, again, they are subdivisions of the same ARK. And so you go back. So if we were to view that manifest, but go back and actually stop viewing the manifest, but the directory it is in, we have got at the same ARK the manifest file and a whole series of extra directories. Now, each of these directories is used to store resolvable URIs for individual canvases within the ARK item, to store any annotations. So every one of these is a basic annotation, and then some of these are actual, what we think of as annotations, which have been generated by creating them in Trifle. They have then been published out, so they sit there as more JSON that is pulled in by the system. This clearly builds a big directory structure, and you can, so there are a whole series of ARKs, and then these are the shoulders and the parts of the key to the ARK, which if you look more into the documentation, it shows you how you can divide them up into different sections until we get down to the 3 basics, which are the first 2 letters of your ARK. And so all of our material comes from 3 directories, which then just keep branching out. And each one of these you can follow down, and you will eventually find a manifest for something. A Sudan Gazette in this case. So there's all sorts of things. So the structure is there. The same structure is also used in parallel for storing the images. So once you have allocated an ARK to a manifest, you have got all of your structure built for your system to write the material out. Now this in turn appears, we can use things for other purposes. So we also use ARKs for catalogs on the system, And you can similarly use the pass-through here to navigate to sections of catalogs. So anything that is served out can be done. And the way it is done with the named things server is you have a series of rules, all of which look only of interest to people who enjoy regular expressions. But this is building each of your manifests and doing the feature that if you add .html onto the end of a manifest, it takes it and moves it to a browser and so on. So literally those few lines deal with all of our ARKs that we have, which are for the IIIF material. We're also using them for research data management and a few other areas, and we could keep expanding them. It will probably make more sense if to use this to answer questions, because it does look rather like a lot of gobbledygook, but that is the advantage of working with IIIF, is from looking at manifests in JSON, we're very used to looking at screens full of text and then they suddenly turn into pictures. So that really is a short run around what we are doing with ARKs, which I hope made some sense.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, fascinating.
So we'll start with questions. So again, if you can put questions in the chat, that'd be great. So the first one from Nuno to Richard. Although the ARK resolves the IIIF manifest, I believe you're not using the ARK as the @ID of the IIIF manifest. Did you consider using the ARK there?
Sorry, I'm trying to see. I think not the ARK on its own. No, I think that is just the way that we have built the system. And obviously some things become obvious after you have done them for a while. And I mean, I think that's something that wouldn't particularly cause a problem to implement.
Related to that, it's been really interesting to hear about the suffix pass-through and the fact that you could have a full ARK for a part of an image, which would be great for citing things. Are there any concerns about the kind of scalability for the local resolver if you were to turn your image ID into a DOI, and so every request for every tile would go through the resolver? Is there any kind of concerns about that side of things, or would you only use your ARK for specific citable parts of images, or would you use it for everything?
I don't think we would use it to that level, and we haven't really considered using it for images so much as for the manifests and the JSON rather than the images. I mean, they could be done within that. Obviously, one thing about a system like this is the longer it runs for, the more you're having to build redirects in. They're very easy to start with because they work perfectly, and then somebody comes along and changes something, and we've already had to build redirects. But actual computer-generated redirects, which are a tiny little scrap of HTML, are not a great problem either to store or to process for a web server.
Mm-hmm. Julien, have you thought about any scalability issues?
Don't think, no. But I mean, the only so I, just for context, I work at the University of Basel and Dash, which is for long-term repository in Switzerland, and we also implement ARK, and I've done IIIF, but here they're not connected. You will have information about IIIF and ARK in linked data serialization, but yeah, that'd be maybe if we start applying, let's say, ARK IDs to every, not only, I mean, object assertions that we have, could be at some point, but I don't think, I mean, just for, I mean, images is not, it's not that a lot of, I mean, and mostly those images are also manifest that now is just a proof of concept manifest. They are just generated on the fly. So we don't really, I mean, they don't really exist as long as no one actually wants to access them, if you will. But I'm not a computer scientist either, so I'm not that specialist in that area, I must say. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll make a comment here that everyone has the freedom to implement ARKs as they wish. If nothing exotic needs to happen, that whatever mechanisms you have for looking up a IIIF path, URL path, whether it's traversing a file system hierarchy or just a straight database lookup, it's exactly the same mechanism can be used by your ARK resolution system. So it's the same basic problem with the same basic scaling tendencies. No limitations there. I think what becomes important is a kind of a long-term sort of maintenance issue. If you have to register, 10,000 components of a large painting and maintain them and separately, run scripts that update those, that's quite a bit different from just maintaining the top level and then letting your IIIF interfaces handle the suffix that whatever shows up at the end.
Mm-hmm. And actually another question to you, John, and again, please feel free to ask any other questions in the chat. But we saw in the Durham example that they've got a local resolver and you were demonstrating the N2T.net. Is it, do most institutions have a local resolver as well as the NT2, or how does it work?
Yes, most of them do. And a local resolver sounds kind of like a big word, but it's actually just a web server. So like, if your web server is sensitive enough, just tuned to, maybe it just takes one Nginx or one Apache rewrite rule that's as sensitive to ARK : and then send that to the right database at lookup and then gets you to the content. That's really what your resolver can look like. It's that simple.
I see, thanks.
There is a convention, just like we sort of suggest people, they should, Richard, you could answer this. If you took your ARKs and you asked N2T.net to resolve them, I assume your organizational URL is registered such that they'll resolve at either starting point?
I believe so.
And that's part of that sort of connection between the name N2T at the beginning of .durham.ac.uk suggests that this is like a cooperative, it's sort of like, if this isn't working for some reason, try it over at N2T.net. And after Durham has been replaced by, heaven forbid that the content has moved to some other location, but it might have, in which case you can get it resolved there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also wanted to point at that. ARK do not mandate institutions that wants to use ARK that the N2T.net resolver should work with those, but it's an option. And what some institutions, and Durham has done it, Dash, BNF as well. I mean, a few of them, you can have a look at the registry. Now there are more than 1,000 institutions that either use it or claim that they have used it at some point. That's also something that is difficult to assess. But what they have as their, let's say, address or web server is actually their own local resolver, which is registered within the registry. So, in the best cases, that means that both the global and the web server / local resolver works. But for some institutions, they don't even have sometimes a local resolver because they go through mostly through Easy ID in the US. So they don't need actually to maintain that. But if they want to stop the collaboration, could have their own web server and then change what is on the registry or the other way around. And there are also other institutions where only their web server actually works with ARKs, but the name tutti.nets do not actually works with those either because it hasn't been updated. But then it's another kind of issue here. It's not a technical issue, or because they just thought, well, we're just going to publish them on our website with our own web resolver and not the name tutti.net, even if that do not work. That's also, I guess, communication issue.
I think, right. Some of the decision points for institutions are they may wish to see their brand. It may be helpful for fundraising, for resources, for internally. They may choose to publish with their host name. But the fact that you could take the same ARK and put it to n2t.net helps those who will see the ARK in the wild without a host name in front of it. So, for example, Richard showed us some screenshots where the ARK just showed up without a host name, and it would be helpful if, without knowing it, you just sent it over to the ARK resolver and it worked. And then people who are quite attached to their own host name have also said they really value the fact that N2T is there, because even if they don't use it now, they like to be able to talk about it as if it's kind of a security net underneath them should their host name go away.
That's great, thanks. Peter, would you be okay to make your comment, to speak your comment?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sorry. I'm just trying to think through the how this would work in terms of systems that want to capture URIs from IIIF resources at different stages potentially of interacting with them. So in my case, I'm trying to, I'd love to have a system where if I save something into Zotero, it will be, the plugin will be smart enough to find the manifest URI and save that into a field in Zotero. And that, of course, at that point, I want the ARK, not the resolved URI, so that if I access it 101 days later, it still works. But in other circumstances, I can imagine not wanting to avoid the resolution steps, to thinking of say a manifest with zillions of annotations. I probably don't want to resolve each one, let alone individual image tiles, and we've already sort of eliminated them. So that is that's what I'm wondering about. I can see it being fairly easy to solve at the manifest level, but getting down into the manifest, probably you end up dealing with a lot of different expectations, and mine might be too specialized to worry about. But any thoughts anyone has on this would be interesting to chew on.
I wonder if your needs do not overlap with the Robustify links specification, where you can, I can put the link on the chat. I haven't given much thought about how to do that with ARKs or IIIF, but where implementers within the HTML page have to assert that actually that's the let's say the URI, the landing page, and but also what is the original URI. And if you have such information, and you can also use here, it's also targeted at I think Internet Archive and other kind of archives. But I don't see the problem also of using persistentifiers with it, and only Internet Archives or the like functionality. And I know that they have some kind of plugins for Zotero. So I don't know if that,
Oh,
but I guess there are overlaps. The question is more for the end user. I think it's still very complicated, but then it's much more effort, I guess, for institutions that wants to have something where you would also have that kind of metadata at let's say manifest level. I don't know. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. I don't know if other may know where better actually this specification or other means to approach that.
oh, thank you. I didn't know about this. I'll follow up on this.
Yeah, just Raphael's speaking to the chat. Would you mind suggesting the signposting bit? Are you okay to take us through? Oh no, Mike. Okay, that's fine. So I will read the chat links, but make sure that I've summarized it correctly. But you've linked to a message on Twitter about signposting headers, and it looks like there's a signposting website which is a way of having link headers and HTTP header to say what the type of the link is. Is that right? Is this something you've come across before, John?
Yes, actually, the signposting has been an important feature of several implementations, and UNT is a very good one. I have another link to put into the chat, which is they have this concept of beautiful URLs, which kind of like it's for getting to parts of things. This was done, 10 years ago or more, and they have a sort of a philosophy, and you can step through their slides to look at things that look like it could have been a prototype for IIIF. They're it's a sort of IIIF in spirit, but this idea of sort of adding path information which helps you understand what's there. But the signposting is, of course, a more modern version of that. But I don't have a very good reference to cite.
Great, thanks. There's one more question I wanted to get in that Josh has asked me to ask, and I don't know whether he wants to ask himself or shall I ask about content state? Okay, I'll go for it. So content state is a new kind of IIIF standard for being able to link interviewers. So for example, if you had 2 images of it open side by side, there's kind of a URL that you can construct that would be the content state for that particular view. And I know Richard's done a lot of work on this as well. Do you think ARKs could be suitable for kind of bookmarking that content state and so it's citable and shareable? Richard, have you thought about that?
I think it might be leaving you with a lot of future maintenance. I mean, I think it probably comes down to whether you think that your manifests are going to be in the same place anyway. Because although we're implementing ARKs, we've got no particular reason to move our manifests. And in fact, our manifests are currently, you can work out what they are by looking at the ARK. What I was trying to show with the way that it broke down the final element of the ARK into the tree to it. And similarly, when it comes to identifying particular parts of the canvas, I think we're probably better off using pixel measurements than trying to ARK it. It's difficult because when you've only had a system in place for 5 years, you're still thinking it's a very good system and there are no problems. I think the more you migrate it, potentially the more problems you could have, but it may well be that we don't need to migrate it very often because we've got a lot of control over our IIIF server, but other things we have less control over, like say the research data.
Julien, have you thought about content state and ARKs?
Not really sure what that is, to be honest.
Sorry, Julien, I just wondered.
I'm trying to think of a use case. I mean, maybe here that would be a scalability issue. I don't know. I'm not sure that's the first thing I would do, let's say. If I started implementing ARK together, that's for sure. Also, I mean, if the target is just the region of interests with some kind of annotation which is encoded in JSON, well, you could robustify this, let's say, or make it persistent, but then if the manifest goes somewhere else and everything, it's not, you don't have really control over it, I guess. So I would rather much have to know that the manifest is not going anywhere, let's say, and that then thinking, oh great, my content state will stay forever, but then if the manifest goes somewhere, then I just end up with some information, maybe metadata around it, but that's it. I don't know. How would content state ARKs look like if there is no manifest or no viewer available anymore on that address? I don't know.
I think content state still, we're yet to see a lot of implementation, and maybe some of these issues will come up. But yeah, interesting to think about.
I have a very interesting sort of theoretical implementation for ARKs, which is if you have a consortium of, say, 15 institutions getting started, they all have their own ARK, but they all run them on one system. And then in the future, some of them get big enough to run their own systems. They can move the ARK that they're using onto their system and carry on and expand it that way. Or say you're migrating from one commercial supplier to another, you can move your ARK around. So I think that's an interesting future possibility.
Great. So just got about 5 minutes left, and John, Julien, when we've met before to discuss the kind of implementation of IIIF and ARKs. And John, I think you noticed there were a few characters that may cause problems. Do you want to mention those ones?
I'm trying to remember from memory. One of them was circumflex. Now, what we identified as possible problems were actually, I figure these are problems that may exist for IIIF in any URL setting, independent of ARK. So it's not really an ARK issue, but we noticed it because we have similar problems. We're thinking about adapting our spec with some best practices. Okay, we'll encode these, but these others, maybe we should create a synonym for, like, the circumflex is a problematic character in URL encoding. So encoding is like a way out. It's kind of like a last ditch effort to make something work. But if you're a veteran of these interfaces, they're difficult to deal with because you don't really always know at what stage you're going to receive the unencoded, the decoded, or and whether you have to do it again. So basically things get very kludgy around encoding issues, and the less you have to do it, the better in general. So I thought, well, is this an issue for IIIF? If it is, it'd be kind of nice if instead of saying circumflex, one could have another way of expressing it. And you could support circumflex. I forget, that was maybe for a region selection, and there was another one, maybe it was, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'm wondering how fixed the the specification is, would it allow the addition of some synonyms that spell out some things, possibly a little bit more verbose, but encoding safe. So that was one issue. Another was, we're thinking, is there any interest in helping us come up with some best practices for ARKs and IIIF? And then we thought maybe there's an interest in, like, annotations get added, but who's storing annotations, and are they persistent annotations? And if not, maybe there's a role there, maybe there's not. So these are three things that occurred to us, and kind of looking for expressions of interest or even help with that, or anyone who wants to be involved. Love to hear from you.
Mm-hmm. And just on the caret symbol, I think it's used for upscaling in version 3. So it's hopefully not an awfully well used character, but currently we can't expand it to kind of words or any other alternative. It's just a symbol. So that'd be interesting to look at. On the best practice, I think that's a really good point. We've had the presentation from Durham, and we've got the excellent article that you've both written. Are there other ways that we could kind of encourage or highlight best practice with ARKs and IIIF?
Well, we don't know what the best practices are, and we don't even know if we will come up with more than not bad practices, since we don't really know yet. But we would welcome people interested in helping and participating. And I think what I might do is just, I'll just put my email address in here, the chat. If you are interested, please contact one of us. If you know how to contact Julien.
Great. I've just got 1 minute to go, and maybe I'll do one more call actually. If we've got the notes document, and if your institution is using ARKs with IIIF, it'd be great to have an example. So if you could put your institution and then an example with either a manifest or image with an ARK link, it'd be great to see them, just so we can have a picture of how people are using them. So if you can do that, that'd be great. Okay, well, just about time. I want to thank you all for attending. Again, if you have any questions, we'll all be on the Slack channel later. If you do have any ARK questions, I think we've been discussing on the general Slack channel, so do feel free to continue the discussion there. So I'd like to say thank you to all the presenters, and hopefully I'll see you on the next community call.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.